Hey Dad, can I ask you a question about 3D printing?
Yes, sure. Why don't you take a seat?
Thank you, Dad. When did you start making models?
1963. My family had just moved to Mineral Wells, Texas. That's a town 100 miles west of Fort Worth, Texas. My father had started Army Aviation Flight School, which the first part was there, and he could only come home during the weekends. So when he came home, he taught me how to do something to stay busy, which was basically started building model kits that we got at the Army Post Exchange. I started with just a couple of basic models. I learned how to put them together, made a lot of mistakes, but that's how I got started. I started working on model kits.
How many models have you built?
1963, that would be a very large number, but what's in this office in particular has approximately over 250 models of various types. Lately, most of those are kits, just like the first one I started building. But lately, during the past 3 years, I've started printing, doing 3D printing. My collection has gone up quite a bit. I have various subjects, mostly starships is what I build, and other objects of different kinds. So, for example, we have in the background, there's some architectural models, monuments, replicas, and things from the Mandalorian, for example, which is one of my shows of interest. So yeah, the 3D printing started around 3 years ago, but there's quite a bit of models in here.
Our main interest is in prop making and 3D printing. How long have you been in that technology?
I have been doing 3D printing for the past 3 years. I started with one printer, an Anycubic i3 Mega, which was an all steel frame type printer. And that lasted me around 2.5 years. My eyes are not as good as they used to be, so I made a mistake while changing a part, and the printer has been down since. So I replaced that with two printers. I have, you'll see I'll show you in a minute, we have a Creality printer. We have two of them. Actually, it's Creality Ender 3 Pro and a Creality Ender 3 version 2. The printers vary in quality, in sound. The sound they make, the version 2 is quieter, but basically the 3D printers are constantly working in this house building something.
Are all 3D printers the same?
Actually, that's a very good question. The 3D printers come in two technologies. They come in, what I use is called fused deposit material, FDM. In FDM, you have a filament of plastic, and there are several types of plastics. They vary in melting temperatures, they vary in temperature resistance. In other words, if you put them in a hot car, well, they melt. Depending on what you're printing and what the use is going to be, you want to select your plastic correctly. But the plastic comes in a filament form. It's basically a long line. It looks like a fishing line or a weed hacker line. And you feed it into the printer. The printer goes through a feeding mechanism. And that goes into the print head, where an extruder basically reduces the filament size from 1.75 millimeters, which is the width of the filament. It comes down to either 0.04 or 0.06 or 0.8 or 1 millimeter. It just reduces the size of the filament to do the print. The material is deposited on the bed of the printer, one layer at a time, and it builds up. And in some of the animations we're going to show you, you will see how the material gets deposited and the model is built up. So the other type of printer that exists is called an SLA, or stereolithography aggregate printer. The stereolithography works in a different way. It uses resin as its media, And there's a vat of resin, basically a little, think of it a small container of resin inside of the printer, and a laser basically cuts the layer that you're printing onto that resin and activates it. That makes it solid. At that stage, it's still semi-solid, and then it goes. That layer goes down, and another layer is photographed, and then another one, another one, until you have a full model. The SLAs originally have come down in price tremendously. The first SLA I saw working was at a former job I had, where they had just opened a new research and development lab, and they showed us in a stereolithography printer that was their crown jewel of the organization, and it was massive machine, very large, and it was done to do prototype of the product they built, which used to be done using molds of steel for injection molding, and created on wood in a lathe. So it was a very lengthy process. It took months and months and months of work to get to a prototype. And with the SLA printer, the process was reduced down to less than a week for a prototype to be able to be physically seen and manipulated, so the tool makers could go and make a mold out of for it if it was approved. Changes could be done very rapidly. But that printer was $100,000. It wasn't affordable. It wasn't a home use printer. The printers in over 20 years of that have elapsed since I saw that printer have come down in price tremendously. You can get an SLA today for less than $300, but the size is still small. So the models you build in that, or the pieces you build, have to be cut to the maximum size that the printer can do. Most hobbyists use SLAs for figures. As the quality of the print on an SLA is higher, the detail is higher, so you can, even though the size is small, the detail is high. On an FDM, the size is bigger, but the detail is not as good because of the different movements of the printer reduce the quality of the detail.
So you mentioned FDM. What other types of printers are they?
There's SLA, which is the other type of printer that I mentioned before, which is the resin printer. But FDM seems to be the most popular one. And FDM printers can get quite big. I've seen some printers online that are able to print the whole Mandalorian helmet in one print. Now it will take several days to get there, but and this printer is very expensive. But the size of the printer can make large prints. So for larger type prints, like for example that starship that you see in the screen behind me, if you wanted to print that in one single piece, and you want a certain size, like for using that as a prop for filming a scene, you would need to have a large Ford printer. Otherwise, you're printing it in pieces.
Are props the only thing that can be made with a 3D printer?
Actually, no. The 3D printer can do any part that you have a file for. I found while researching some of the things for helping with the photography that you're doing and the filming you're doing, I found something interesting. A gentleman from the Netherlands built a full motion camera rig for his podcast using 3D printers and readily available materials. He wanted to have something that would hold his SLR camera, so he can move around and adjust it and have pan and motion control on it. But they were $10,000 and he couldn't afford that. So he built 3D printer parts to hold together a series of aluminum bars where the camera track can be made to slide, not only on the horizontal plane, what we would call the XY angle, but on the Z plane, which is top to bottom. That allowed him to have a camera rig on a very affordable basis. So the cost of those plans to do that is around $50. So that's not much money, and you can build the parts using the 3D printer and then procure the materials and build this very expensive camera rig for use on your projects for very little money. So no, props is not the only thing that 3D printers can make.
What other printers would you recommend to get started?
I've been very impressed with the FDM Creality printer. The quality of the print is very high. If you have an environment that noise is a problem, like if you're working from home and you don't want the sound of the printer affecting your work, the version 2 is one of the quietest printers I've ever seen. You can barely tell it's running unless you're actually seeing it move. So I would recommend a Creality Ender 3 version 2 as a starting printer. Those printers are less than $250.
What is the slicing process like?
Slicing is a process where the model, think again, the starship we have behind us, is cutting those layers that the printer needs to work on. Each pass is a slice, and that model behind me could have 20,000 slices, but the software does them for you automatically. What you do is you orient the part to minimize the amount of support structures that you need. And think about like when you're printing something and it's hanging in the air, like those engines on the Starship, they need something to hold them so the print head can deposit the material. So that's called support structure. And again, the printers generate those based on your instructions on the slicing software that comes with the printer. And so you orient the model to minimize the support structures you're going to need, because that's material that's going to get wasted, and it's material that's going to take time to print. And so the more complex the structure is, the more chances it has to fail. So the slicing process requires you to think. It's sometimes better to slice apart two pieces, so you don't have support, in order for it to print better. So cutting apart in pieces is not necessarily a bad thing. It just needs some means that behind, to build build the model, you're going to have to glue those parts together. Some of the models come pre-cut. They come cut in a lot of different pieces, and I think you'll see us building a sword in the video where the sword is printed in pieces, and then we glue it together using resin type glue, epoxy, to put it all together. And from there is finishing, which we use a series of putties and other materials to make it smooth, and so it will look like metal on camera.
Where did you get the files for printing?
There are multiple sources for the files. Manufacturers are eager to put files out there because that's how they sell material. People have to print things, so they put out a lot of files. So the designs are in multiple websites. The one I use the most is thingiverse.com, sponsored by MakerBot, a 3D printer manufacturer. There are thousands of files there for printing pretty much anything you may be looking for. Other 3D enthusiasts sell their files directly on marketplaces like Etsy or their own websites. For example, the camera rig I mentioned before, the author's site sells it for $15. So you can get files pretty much anywhere. If you do a Google search, you'll find your own sites. My favorite, again, Thingiverse, and the other one will be Yegi.com. Both of them will get you any design you probably imagine.
And what will the future bring?
What will the future bring? Well, the future will bring a reduction in cost. The printers will become more and more affordable. The materials will get stronger. We're already starting to see some of that future in some of the materials we have today. Things like plastic with carbon fiber built in. We have plastic with wood today to give a wood texture to prints. So depending on the future will bring us stronger, better, less expensive materials. They will also bring higher quality of printing available on both Fuse and SLA. But I can't wait until we have our own Star Trek replicator so we can order a cup of Earl Grey tea and hot.